I want to respond to a couple of the very specific points that you made, Cully. I mean, first of all, you made this point at the very beginning about longer sentences leading to safer communities or reductions in crime. And, you know, on the one hand, I couldn't disagree more. On the other hand, you're stating something that's so obvious that how could anybody disagree with it? I mean, if everybody in society were in prison forever, we would have no crime in the community. So of course, putting more people in prison for longer on some level reduces certain kinds of crime, certainly if we don't count the crime and the violence that occurs within prisons. On the other hand, we know that people who've been in prison for the longest periods of time are the least likely to recidivate, and that we keep people in this country in prison way beyond any significant statistical risk to public safety. And that's a decision we make that separates us from every other civilized country in the history of the world. It's a policy choice. It doesn't really have to do with safety so much as with the desire for vengeance and retribution and with the history of racism in this country. You talked about the progressive prosecutor movement, and I worry, having not read your book, that, but just seeing the title and hearing your opening remarks, that your book misrepresents, mischaracterizes, and misunderstands what the progressive prosecutor movement's about. The progressive prosecutor movement is not about putting defendants over victims. Now, I want to be really, really clear about how the law works. We can agree or disagree about what philosophy is the best for our community. The U.S. Constitution, that the conservatives who've taken control of the Supreme Court love to pound, creates rights for criminal defendants. It does not create rights for victims of crime. We may disagree with that. We may not like that. We may want to change that. And in fact, some states have, like California. D.A. Stephan pointed out Article 1, Section 28 of the California Constitution is one of the models across the country, Marcy's Law, for victims' Bill of Rights. But you know what it fails to do? It fails to create remedies when victims' rights are violated. It fails to come with a funding mandate to give district attorneys' offices resources to do the kind of work that you heard D.A. Price talk about her office doing in her first year. Victim services, language access, therapy, counseling, medical expenses. None of that is a constitutional right. Defendants have constitutional rights, and when those rights are violated, there are remedies, including dismissal of charges, which comes at a cost to safety and to victims. So suggesting that because progressive prosecutors seek to comply with constitutional rights, seek to avoid having cases dismissed because of discovery violations, because of racial bias, is somehow tantamount to disregarding victims' rights is simply not true. Particularly when you remember, as I know everybody at this panel knows well, that we do not ask prosecutors to represent victims of crime. We do not. We represent all of the people of our jurisdictions, including the people we're prosecuting, including the people they harmed, including the police who arrested them, including the Chamber of Commerce and the ACLU and everybody else who lives in our community. We represent all of them. And so to pretend that the only people whose voice matters is victims disregards our Constitution, and it disregards our ethical duty, as D.A. Price said, that we swear to the bar of the state of California. I want to just make two other brief points in response to Cully's kind of opening question. One is that the focus by so many conservatives in this country, by Fox News, on cherry-picked, out-of-context statistics about D.A. Krasner or D.A. Price or D.A. Boudin is not only a double standard in the sense that we don't have that same level of scrutiny on the DA that replaced me or the DA that preceded D.A. Price, but more problematic for their theory of what accounts for or leads to safety is that the highest murder rates in the country and the highest murder rates in the state of California are not in progressive prosecutor jurisdictions. They're in red states and red counties. And if you look at where crime went up the most in 2020 and 2021 and 2022, it's not places like San Francisco, where we presided over a historic decrease in incarceration. We closed a jail. We reduced the number of children in cages by 70%. We reduced the number of people in state prison out of our county by over 25%. We didn't see an increase in violent crime. We saw a decrease. We created a virtuous cycle where less incarceration meant less crime. The places that saw homicide and other violent crime and property crime skyrocket were red jurisdictions and red states. Places that seek the death penalty at the drop of a hat. It does not work to make us safer, but it's effective political rhetoric. The last thing I want to say is that when you criticize the progressive prosecutor movement for choosing not to criminalize people who use the toilet on the street, rather than holding those who refuse to build public toilets accountable. Talk about accountability. We had public toilets in San Francisco for a little while, and our mayor decided to take them out of the budget. At the same time she appointed a DA, she was asking to prosecute poverty. That doesn't solve the problem of where people are going to defecate. It does not make our streets cleaner. But what it does do critically for anybody who is serious, and I challenge you to tell me how you can justify saying you care about public safety, you care about people who are victims of homicide or robberies or rape, when you want prosecutors with limited resources and courthouses with limited judges and limited jury pools to waste their time prosecuting somebody for being poor, while people who have committed murder don't even get arrested, much less taken to trial. The progressive prosecutor movement, first and foremost, is about focusing limited resources on the crimes that have the most serious consequences for those who've been harmed and those who stand accused.